The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight, we got a great guest tonight, and if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat, Tabby Cat, or myself, and we will get those answered for you. And I don't see Tabby Cat in the chat room, so you probably can't send her one either. But if you're listening from somewhere else, you can come over to para-xradionetwork.com and just join in the chat. So it's very easy to do. So with that, tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Good evening, everyone.
And we got Tabby Cat Gash.
How you doing, everybody?
And we got with us Jeffrey Gould.
Hello.
All right. Well, because there's probably going to be a lot to talk about, we're not going to, just talk a whole lot here to start with. Because I think unless there's any questions that Tabby or Jeff or Barbara's got, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce our guest.
Okay, well, our guest tonight is Lyle Blackburn. He's a native of Texas, cryptozoologist, author, and filmmaker who has contributed significant definitive research on the Boggy Creek Monster of Fouke, Arkansas, delivering a deeper insight into the background of southern Sasquatch legends. He's the founder of the rock band Ghoultown, which has at least 9 albums in release. Lyle also narrates and was producer of documentary films on Mothman and the Boggy Creek Monster. And he served both as consulting producer and special episode host on the TV series Monsters and Mysteries in America, and generally can be found speaking at various cryptozoology conferences and horror conventions, and is well known for a trademark black cowboy hat. So welcome, Lyle Blackburn.
Thanks for having me.
All right, no problem. None whatsoever. Glad to have you. I think I'd like to find out exactly what got you looking for things in the swamp. What led you in that direction?
Well, as far back as I can remember, I loved horror movies, anything that had to do with monsters, when I was little. And somewhere in there, I got a book in elementary school that had stories of Bigfoot, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster, things like that. And, that really grabbed my imagination because I thought, wow, this is like monsters, but these things could be out there. These could be real. And growing up in Texas, of course, all these things seem far away, Loch Ness Monster in Scotland and things like that. But I had the fortune of seeing a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek when I was young in a drive-in. And that dramatized sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas, only about 3 hours from where I lived. So that kind of brought it home. I thought, wow, there could be things like this out here. I grew up hunting with my father, so we spent a lot of time in the woods, and that kind of set me on that course for a lifelong fascination with the subject. And I really didn't become a serious researcher per se until I was an adult, and then I started looking into these things sort of with more of an adult view, and ended up deciding to write a book about the legend of Boggy Creek and the Fouke Monster. And that book came out, The Beast of Boggy Creek, and I got a great response from that, and that sort of set me on the path of, okay, this is great stuff. Let me continue this research. And being that I'm from the South, I'm in Texas, and a lot of the places that I've visited that have phenomenon, are in that area. That's kind of why I always lean towards swampy southern areas, and that's kind of prevalent in most of my books. And because I can go to those places and I can write about them, I can interview people, and that's become the focus of my research. So it's just been a lot of fun doing these things.
Now, have you actually visited Fouke Swamp area?
Oh yes, for countless times at this point. I was going down there prior to writing the book and going out, and when I actively started interviewing people, kind of digging up the stories and the facts and everything from the creature sightings to the making of the movie, then I did spend significant more time, going out in the swampy Sulphur River bottoms. And ever since then, I go back there frequently, more than any other place. And then, of course, I've, branched out and been all over the Deep South to similar places. But it's just my favorite sort of home place as far as research.
Now, what makes the Boggy Creek Monster so different from what people today just commonly know as Bigfoot? Because I remember seeing that movie myself when it came out.
All of the beauty that I could see from the stars. And from there, he would ask me all these questions.
Bigfoot
and
with an attitude
my mind
problem,
began to wonder
because it was, pretty scary, this critter going around and hurting people and everything else. But where does the Boggy Creek Monster differ from your typical Bigfoot? Or is there a difference?
Well, I think technically there's not much difference. The movie definitely plays up the scary aspect of it, and being that some of the encounters that were first made public in 1971 had to do with the creature trying to get in the home and seemingly attacking livestock and things like that, it automatically branded that creature and almost branded Southern Sasquatch as having this aggressive sort of nature. But when you really kind of look at all Bigfoot reports and things, they're very similar. The creature here, it is described as maybe being more aggressive, even more hairy, more unkempt, often said to have a foul odor, hence like a skunk ape. But, you can find stories of aggressive Bigfoots throughout, in the Pacific Northwest, Ohio, everywhere, really. There's just those cases where individuals seem to be more aggressive than others. But I think what it boils down to is when a creature like that is seen near a small town, the newspapers called it the Fouke Monster, and then a movie was made, and it's the Boggy Creek Monster. It takes on sort of a personality of its own, as if it's, a very unique thing. But, if you start going around, the skunk ape is in Florida, it's called the skunk ape, and there's plenty of other regional Bigfoots, the Caddo critter, the Holly Him, the Sharpsville Monster, all these other sort of ones that have a name, but essentially they're all basically bipedal, hairy, Bigfoot-like creatures that remain unproven.
Do you figure that the reason that some of these various different versions of Bigfoot, I'm using that as, just a general term, maybe the reason that they do look different is for the same reason that we here in America, even though we're all Americans, you can go into every state and have a different accent. Heck, you can even go into a state and have different regional dialects. You figure that the critters such as Bigfoot, it adapts to its environment, and of course in a swamp area, it's nasty, it's humid and slimy, and you probably have more of a stench about you than, say, if you were out in the desert area. And perhaps it's just the way it's treated. as to how it behaves, because people do the same thing.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think that is the reason for some of the differences in the descriptions. Some of those in the Pacific Northwest often described as being 8 feet tall or 9 feet tall, and they're bulky and huge. When you get into a environment that's hotter and more humid and things, the creature is often described as being a little shorter, more ape-like. The skunk ape, for example, is always described as being more ape-like. And that doesn't mean they're not Bigfoot. It just means that they're adapted to their environment. And, down here in the South, we shoot at things, and that may explain why some of these creatures are aggressive and territorial and mad, and I certainly understand that. And if
don't blame them.
I had a fur coat and I lived in a swamp, I'd be right mad too. But and of course it gives them the personality. But I think there's something called Bergman's Law, which is animals that live more north and colder environments are often heavier and bigger. And so all these things with the Bigfoot descriptions seem to generally match up with other laws that affect other animal species.
Let's talk a little bit more about that scent, because it fascinates me that, the skunk ape obviously got its name because of that, the odor, but it also seems to me that it's like a pheromone or a marking tool that lets them be territorial to a certain degree, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that they can probably control, because you have sometimes people have a fairly close encounter and, they say, I didn't smell anything. Shouldn't I smell anything? It's, this is skunk ape territory. I think it depends on whether the creature is alarmed. It's not simply a body odor situation where if they're in the summer in these places, they all smell the same. It's more of that territorial markings. And there's so many animals that have unique characteristics and abilities that they can put off smells and all sorts of things to let others know that they're there, or to alert their own families. So yeah, I think that's exactly what it is.
And the other side to that, at least in the northern Sasquatch hunting groups, they talk about being sick to their stomach, or almost like an EMF kind of headache that they get. Are you familiar with that? And do you think it's sort of like a protective or some sort of thing that they can emanate to keep people away?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. You do have those eyewitness encounters in which the individuals say they either sensed something, or they felt this nauseating feel, or their head felt strange, and they in some way or another connected that to the sighting of a creature. So yeah, I think we can't underestimate the abilities of animals. Look at things that an octopus can do, or even a chameleon that can change colors, or just the heightened senses and things that animals have. So I think certainly that there could be something that they can emanate that would give off this sort of adverse effect to not only humans, but whatever else they wanted to, keep away.
There's that show on TV that it was like a Finding Bigfoot show, and they had a zoologist in there and a bunch of other people, and one of them did get sick, really, really sick, and it makes me wonder if they have that ability, and is it sort of regional, like you were talking about? Some of them emanate an odor, and some of them emanate this kind of EMF field, it seems like, right?
Right. It's hard to really tell if it's contained to any certain region or not, or it's just different individuals or can have or are willing to use those things. Because, over time, as looking at these reports for a decade or more, you just tend to see a lot of randomness. There's no one thing or one state that would have any more reports of that than, say, another one. So that's kind of the hard part about this, is there is some inconsistency in not as many patterns that could help define whether there's a group in a certain region that may have those abilities and a certain group over here that doesn't. I'm sure if you took all the data and tried to look at every sighting, which would be thousands and thousands, you could probably find something in there, but that would take some considerable work to kind of figure out whether it is contained to a region.
Do you believe that they're social creatures?
I think somewhat, but I think there's definitely a solitary nature, because if we, take the anecdotal sightings, as given, almost always it's a solitary creature. So, no one very rarely comes up and say they saw a family group or even two together, or, never like I saw a whole tribe or anything like that. So I think obviously they have to be somewhat social in order to keep their population going. But I think it's like a lot of other apex predators where the males primarily probably roam and go from one group to another and stay relatively solitary most of their lives.
So they have their own man cave.
Man cave? Well, my buddies always post pictures of their man caves that has Bigfoot stuff on the wall. So I guess a Bigfoot has a big cave with pictures of humans that they tricked or attacked. I don't know.
Oh, I could just picture that. Somebody ought to make a cartoon of that one.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Like it has all the opposite stuff from the humans that correlates to what we have.
Complete with pin-up Yetis,
Exactly.
Yeah, look at the fur on that one.
You guys ain't right. Now, you're talking a lot about the swamp in the area that you live in southern Louisiana, or is it southern Arkansas?
Well, yeah, I live near Fort Worth, Dallas area, Texas, right. And so I'm in a great position because if I go just a bit northeast, I'm there in the swampy bottoms of Arkansas, and then if I go east, I'm right there in Louisiana. And there's right there when you get to the border of Texas and Louisiana, there's a place called Caddo Lake that is just it's majestic and beautiful and spooky all at the same time. It's this primordial swamp-looking lake that has the cypress trees and the Spanish moss. When you get out there in a canoe, I mean, you literally kind of expect a dinosaur or something to just pop out of the duckweed and look at you. So those are great places, and the places where I really love to go and even just canoe around there late at night in the moonlight. And they can be really spooky, obviously, but these are places where people have reported sightings for many, many years. So it's really good areas.
So how many different swamps are they, and roughly, what are their names so we can kind of keep them separated?
Well, there's all sorts of types of swamps, whether it's a bog where the rainfall builds up, or whether it's plains where rivers have overflowed, or whether it's marsh-like areas that are on the coastal estuaries. My book Sinister Swamps, I cover larger, more notable swamps around North America that have a long history of paranormal activity, whether that's sightings of monsters, which there certainly are, from Bigfoot to pterodactyls and black dogs, to obviously other phenomenon. You know, when you get in a swampy area, there's ghost lights and orbs and ghosts and tales of witches, all sorts of things. In that book, I cover roughly about 20 different major swamps, from Hockomock Swamp in Massachusetts to Honey Island Swamp in Louisiana to the Everglades to the Okefenokee, which is a huge swamp in southern Georgia, to Big Swamp, and there's even swamps in the middle of Texas where you wouldn't expect there to be things like that. Otine Swamp. So there's just so many, just countless numbers. And if you know, it's kind of hard to put a swamp in a boundary, I guess. So the more I looked into those cases, because I thought, you know, swamps are cool and spooky and there's always strange phenomenon, the more I looked into it, the more I realized just how many swampy areas there are all across North America.
Well, so if you look at all those swamps and you start to figure out what is exactly are they eating in there, and what type of wildlife are you looking at in those swamps? Must be something large enough for them to feed on, right?
Oh, certainly. I think swamps are the most nutrient-rich places. I mean, you have thousands of, say, frogs. I mean, when you go in there at night paddling, I mean, the frogs are just so loud, and you can see them everywhere. You know, frogs, snakes, all sorts of insects. Obviously, there's a lot of water, so that gives you a lot of vegetation, you know, that could be eaten. There's, you know, swamps. There, deer live in swamps, wild hogs, of course, alligators. You know, I've seen countless alligators. I mean, I doubt that a Bigfoot or something would like to tangle with that, but yeah, definitely. There's just, it's really rich, and I think that is one reason that perhaps there's more sightings within those swampy areas of cryptids, because this is not only a place that has a lot of, you know, food and water resources, but it's also a place that's usually fairly undeveloped, less foot traffic. You can really get back there in remote areas that people don't go. And I think that would give them the ideal seclusion that they obviously require in order to stay unproven.
Wow. Well, pretty much every state has its own swamps and monsters.
Yeah, I mean, every state really, because, you know, people think about swamps sort of in terms of...
Heck, even New Jersey's got its swamps.
Yeah.
The South. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Where I grew up, we had numerous swamps, but you really kind of had to be a local to know about them, but we, you know, as we grew up, we learned and knew where they were.
Jeff, you're breaking up.
Of course I'm breaking up. I'm trying to say something.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of these swamps, I mean, if you go into the place, you know, locally, you would learn about things you wouldn't know about, or, you know, that aren't written about maybe even on the internet so much. So, you know, I've concentrated obviously on ones that had a long published history of stuff. And then you could find other swamps where, you know, if you went somewhere and started to talk to people who live nearby, they'd probably start telling you all kinds of crazy stories about what had been reported there. You know, like my grandfather saw this, or, you know, there's rumored of this monster. So it's just an endless amount of really cool, fascinating tales and legends and reported encounters coming out of those sorts of areas.
Okay, we got a really great question in the chat room, and one that's very timely right now. And she's asking, and I want to know this too, is where do these creatures go for shelter during major natural events like hurricanes, or in California, now we have forest fires. We're starting to see bears encroach into habited areas now. But where do these creatures go?
Well, that's a great question, and you would expect that when we do have things like flooding or fires, that perhaps there would be suddenly there'd be more sightings of them because they're having to flee their usual habitat. But I mean, essentially, I guess they do what other creatures, they have to, move out of the area. Of course, climb trees, whatever it takes. I think the key here is there are just so many less cryptids, or the population of a Sasquatch is so small compared to those of bears that they're still very hard to see, even if there's a natural disaster. You may, all of a sudden we see some bears, but you got to remember there could be 25,000 bears in some of the northern states where there could be a viable population of Bigfoots, 250 or 300 individuals. So I think it's still going to be hard to see them. And, they just would do what any other wildlife would do, is leave the area or find high ground or whatever they had to do, or perish. That's another sad part about it, is those forest fires and things, we might have lost, a significant amount of Bigfoots. Who knows?
Wow.
Yeah,
Very
that's
true.
sad.
So, how many of the different swamps have you actually been to, and what are the different types of swamp creatures that they're supposed to be? I know you got lizard man and the beast of Boggy Creek. Are those pretty much the same, or are they different?
Those are different. The lizard man is said to be a bipedal reptilian type humanoid. It's anthropomorphic, which looks human-like, yet it's covered in brown or green, sort of scaly skin. And one of my books, Lizard Man, I discussed the history of a creature called the Bishopville lizard man near a place called Scapore Swamp in South Carolina. And so that, to me, was definitely something described differently than Bigfoot. And to me, it was like a creature from the Black Lagoon type of a case in modern day times, very fascinating. So when I wrote that book, I went out there to South Carolina and spent some time there in that little town of Bishopville and interviewed key witnesses and the sheriff who had looked into that case back in 1988. And from there, I've been to numerous other swamps. I mean, in my book, I'd been to about maybe 15 of those all around that I talk about, and had literally canoed in there or interviewed people or whatever at some time or another. And you get reports of pretty much everything. There's a Hockomock Swamp in Massachusetts. There was a lot of documented newspaper accounts of people seeing what they described as pterodactyls, like pterosaur, flying, leathery skinned flying creatures, in and around that swamp, sort of in a flap. And then I interviewed a guy who saw this huge dog-like creature run across the road one night when he was coming through there he was a prison guard and drove at night. And he saw this huge sort of uncanny, creepy dog run in front of him. Then, of course, Bigfoot sightings. There's an area that I covered in Georgia in the Altamaha River area, that the Altamaha River basically runs into a swampy area as it gets towards the coast. And within that, there's a creature called the Altamaha, which is, for lack of a better term, sort of a Loch Ness monster, sort of a creature, a serpent-like thing that has been seen down there for decades in the river and in the swampy areas around that. So, you've got the river monster types. You've got puckwudgies, which are sort of small goblin-like creatures that are said to inhabit swamps. There was what's called black dogs, sort of hellhound-looking things. There is strange sightings of black panthers. I got that in several of the swamps. So really just no end to the sort of categories of cryptids that would be reported in one or more of the swampy areas that I looked into.
Lyle, have you ever heard of, I know this sounds kind of strange, but have you ever heard of the United States FBI having a file on Bigfoot?
Well, I mean, that's obviously one thing that's been debated over the years about Bigfoot, because we know, of course, they've looked into phenomenon like UFOs, and conceivably, I'm sure that at some time or another, some government agency has surely tried to look into this, and probably more early on, back in in the late 60s when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out and things like that. I guarantee you they wanted to know more about that, and probably did. So I suspect that they do have some files or something somewhere which noted whatever they, concluded about it. Now, that goes into the theory of, some say that the government knows all about Sasquatch and they're not telling us. I honestly don't think they know any more than we do, because they haven't done anything with that information, conceivably, that the government doesn't do things very well and is totally inefficient. So if these hunter friends of mine in Texas can't get a good, picture of Bigfoot and other things, then I doubt the government could do better than them. And I know some really, really good hunters, and some guys, especially in an area called the Ouachita Mountains that span from eastern Oklahoma to western Arkansas. Some associates of mine have spent years up there with camera traps and just really intensely researching this area that has a lot of sightings. And some of these guys are military trained. There's biologists, very, very skilled and knowledgeable guys. And while they've come up with a lot of anecdotal sightings and field reports and audio and rock throwing events, they still have been unable to really capture that either ultimate photo or a body or anything else to ultimately prove it. So I think it's something that we can't prove, neither can the government.
Yeah. Well, there's an awful lot of people that believe that there's a connection or a correlation between Bigfoot and UFO sightings. And to me personally, I think that's just a little bit far-fetched. But when you think about it, if the FBI did have a file or does have a file on Bigfoot, it's probably somewhere in between the pages of the UFO sightings. I mean, the government still is trying to claim, our research department, such as Project Blue Book, it doesn't exist anymore, which I don't believe. It has another name. But if Bigfoot does have any kind of connection with UFOs, it would fall under that category of the government looking at Bigfoot as, sounds strange, as being a national security risk, because they consider UFOs to be that. So Yeah, it would make a certain amount of sense. I mean, the government has done strange things before, so why not?
Right. And if you kind of look at the golden age of this stuff in the 1970s, all of those phenomenons were interconnected. And early on, you had UFO researchers that would look into Bigfoot things. You didn't have a lot of cryptozoologists or Bigfoot hunters, so they were, a lot of the books that were written back then just covered all sorts of crazy stuff, all in, all the paranormal phenomenon in one, chunk. And I think probably the government at those early times probably looked at it, like you say, in exactly the same way. Or it's like, well, is all this stuff connected? Why are people reporting UFOs or Bigfoots or whatever? Although, in my opinion, I don't think they have anything to do with each other, because, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of Bigfoot eyewitnesses, and none of them say, well, I saw a UFO and then I saw a Bigfoot. It's far more rare, and in which there's some UFO phenomenon that could be connected to a creature. Now, certainly there is times where those correspond or are seen in the same vicinity, but that doesn't mean the Bigfoot got off of the craft. And the Bigfoot, just the persona and the image of it is so much, it's so man-like. It's like the apes we have here. It's like great apes. It's so terrestrial that, to me, it's something that is closer related to us on this earth than it is, aliens coming from another planet that probably look nothing like we even perceive them to look. That, to me, that Bigfoot is just so much it's so man-like,
Yeah. Now, have you had any of your own personal experiences with something that you really couldn't explain?
Yeah, I've had a few. To start, ironically, I've seen a ghost, which I saw something when I was a senior in high school. And just to make that a short story, a friend of mine lived in a house, and he had claimed to see a ghost of a boy in the house, and his parents had seen it, and even several of my friends said they had seen this. And, it was just something that they talked about. I didn't think too much of it, but one evening I was sitting there in his living room, and just out of the corner of my eye, I saw this whitish figure about the size of a boy walk across this hallway. And I just, I turned my head and looked, and it was very quick, but it's like, wow, I just saw, I guess, the ghost. And, that kind of got me, I was interested in ghosts and all this stuff early on, so that was really cool, and it was exciting. As someone who's, been studying cryptids and so forth, I have not definitively seen something that I would say is a Bigfoot. However, there have been something vague that I saw once, and also something that has just eluded me, and something that howled at myself and another researcher once. And to be short about those, once in Boggy Creek area, we were paddling the swamps at midnight, and we heard this strange howl. At first we thought, is that the weirdest coyote you ever heard, or what? And then it howled a second and a third time, and at that point we realized, I can't identify that. I don't know what that is. And then myself and my partner, very experienced in hunting and outdoors, and there's a lot of noises that can be made from birds. Even foxes made weird noises, obviously coyotes and things. We couldn't identify it, but it stopped, and then we ended up paddling back down to where our camp was. And when we got out, pulled the canoe up, and went up this kind of hill area where our tent was, all of a sudden we hear that same howl right down there where we had pulled the canoe out just right across the water channel. And I was like, whoa. And I grabbed the flashlight and ran down that hill trying to see what it was. But, of course, whatever it was quickly moved off, and then I heard the howl again, probably 50 yards away, and then it was gone. But, you know, I can't say that that was the Fouke monster or a Bigfoot, but it was definitely big, strange, and presumably it followed us down the waterway there.
Those howls are amazing, you know. And talk about communication a little bit, because I find it fascinating. Everybody has these recordings, and also of the howls, but also the knocks. Has anybody sat down and started to analyze the series of knocks and what they could possibly mean? Are they vocalizations of a speech of some sort, or of communication, do you think? And if so, is there sort of a repertoire that they have to say, like, 2 knocks, then 3 knocks, then 1 means get out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and certainly one that's been looked into as far as trying to understand that if those knocks are coming from Bigfoots, what is it they're trying to convey? Now, as far as the audio vocals, the howls and things, there are some guys that will take those and analyze those and compare them to others and have files and sound waves in which they evaluate those howls as being from something we can't identify. The wood knocks, and you do get recordings of wood knocks, I don't really know of a study where they've had enough of those to really start analyzing as if it's sort of a Morse code or something that they're using. It's usually just a knock or 2, and that's about all you get. Sometimes if you knock, whatever it is will knock back, but much like most of Bigfoot, there's just not enough data or files or uniform collaboration to try to even decode any of this. And, you know, at best, we just can theorize that if that's Bigfoot making those knocks, obviously they're communicating in some way, whether that's between themselves or a warning to humans. I think probably communicating among themselves. They don't really need to warn us. I wouldn't think. It's just something that if they want to remain elusive, maybe they use the knocks. So, but again, it was rarely, if any, ever have somebody saying they actually saw a Bigfoot making the knock. You just got strange knocks coming out of the woods with no real definitive evidence to say even what's making those knocks, you know. So that's a hard puzzle to solve.
You got to figure that Bigfoot are, whether it is actually an offshoot or a cousin to humans, or if it's another animal species altogether, they still have the same instincts that all animals do, even we do, when something is near and we feel threatened or we feel endangered in some way. Then your first reaction is one of 2 things, fight or flight. And a Bigfoot, being so much larger than a human, they're not going to confront a human unless it's absolutely necessary, because they don't know what they're up against, first of all. So, in my opinion, most Bigfoot would be more likely to avoid you, and if they are close by, it's just simply to wonder what you're doing in their territory. They're not going to confront you. They're going to stay away, and let's face it, human beings in the woods, unless you're extremely stealthy, we make a heck of a lot of noise when we're in the woods. You know, we're stomping around, we're talking, we're, laughing and that sort of thing. Bigfoot can hear us a mile away, like most other animals have acute hearing. And they're not going to come any closer than they absolutely have to. So those sightings where people camp out in the woods at night and they hear something stomping around their campsite, they get up the next morning and something's, torn up or knocked over. Most likely it's probably a bear or something like that, but if it is a Bigfoot, they're just coming around to see if maybe they couldn't get a free lunch, just like a bear would.
Or they're sizing us up for dinner.
Yeah, looking to see. Yeah,
we don't know the psychology of a Bigfoot yet, and I'd hate to anthropomorphize something that we don't know anything about yet. So,
no.
But it's fascinating because, and Lyle, maybe you can address some of the shows that are on television right now. How much of it's true and how much of it's just sensationalism. But some of it does talk of Bigfoots in packs and chasing people and very aggressive. And do you think that that's more common now, or is it an aggressive behavior because humans are encroaching into their area more?
I don't think it's necessarily more common, and you got to be careful which TV shows you're deriving information from, because some of those more sensational ones, if you will, are the least credible. It's TV, and as well, it's not to say that the researchers themselves aren't credible. You're at the mercy of a production company and network who does the final editing of those things and implies what they want to imply. So it doesn't matter what intentions and you may have, but basically, I think ultimately these creatures would be like any others. If certain individuals were more aggressive or ornery or felt threatened, then they would be aggressive, and certain ones may be more calm. So, I think that some of those shows amp up the craziness of it, while in reality, there's not that many Bigfoot attacks. They do occur, and they're spread out across vast territories and over vast periods of times, when the majority of Bigfoot sightings are simply, oh my gosh, what did we just see run across the road? That's the majority. But a television show, they need action, and they need to move forward. They got to make wood knocks. They need to make howls. They got to say, well, I think it's a bunch of Bigfoots after us. So I don't think that Bigfoots are basically any different now than they ever have been.
Oh, yeah. And you get the red glowing eye stories and what have you. And I think most hunters can probably tell you can probably tell the creature by the glow of the eyes, right?
Yeah, I mean, most experienced hunters, especially if you're like a coon hunter or something that goes out after dark, can usually identify. I can spot a possum or a raccoon easily if I see the eye shine. But there's those times where they see something that the eyes are a little further apart than you're used to, and it implies that it's a much larger creature. And if it's not, an owl or something reflecting your flashlight, then who knows what it is. And of course, the red glowing eyes is something that, it strikes a spooky fear in everybody. So, those are something that does get reported with Bigfoot sightings.
Yeah, I think some of that stems from the fact remember the old cameras used to have the red glow in the eyes every time you snapped a flash photo.
Right.
That's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it tends to be is superstition. And so how do you go about looking at these stories and saying, well, this is probably folklore and legend, and this one's probably based in a little bit more reality?
Well, I think after a while, the more you interview people, especially interview people firsthand, then you start to get a good sense about which things are more probable to have been a possible unknown creature and which things are just sort of either wishful thinking or mistaken identities and things. And certainly, there's a range of it. And it's always great when I research an area and find some old newspaper articles and establishing a long history of these things. But certainly you have to say, well, it's possible that without having interviewed the person myself, that person was maybe not familiar with the woods as somebody else, or, may not have been aware that a bear was in the area. So, the best thing for me is when possible, if I can interview a witness firsthand, meet that person, and really get a sense of, whether they could discern the difference between Bigfoot and other things, then, those are the ones that you could say, well, okay, there's something to this. And that's really what keeps me there. I wouldn't say that, I just believe every Bigfoot account that I ever hear. That's not realistic. But there's those ones where you interview somebody and you may get to know this person. In a few cases, I've gotten to know them. I got to know their family, the circumstances of the case, for example. One where two sisters in Florida were driving north from the coast in mid-afternoon and saw this upright, hair-covered creature just basically stride right across the road in front of them in full daylight. And I interviewed both these women. I met them, and I can guarantee you they're not lying. And they didn't believe it was a person in a costume. And where they saw it, you kind of rounded a corner, and that's where it was. It would not have been a good place to run across the road because you could very well be hit by the car if you were a human trying to trick people, for example. These girls absolutely saw that, and it was daylight, no mistake. And it's those kind of encounters that keep me on the track saying, okay, I can't explain that. There is something to this because these two individuals saw it. And there's others like that where I'm like, this person absolutely saw something that I can't explain. And those kind of keep you on. The ones that you feel are legend or folklore and everything are great too, because they, it's great for the story and fascinating that people see these things. But there's the key ones that keep you on the track.
So you say
if you sent me out in the woods, I would probably not be able to tell the difference between an ET and a Bigfoot either. It's So with the problem, I guess, it comes down to, are you finding, like we do in the paranormal field, there's an awful lot of first-time or neophyte hunters out there that simply just don't know what they're doing and are getting all confused by what they're actually seeing?
I mean, that could be, I never want to imply that I'm an expert in this because people, say, oh, well, in newspapers will interview me and then there's a story that says Bigfoot expert says this. Like, I never call myself an expert. All of us are basically, just doing our best and can't prove anything than anybody else. But certainly when you're talking about experience in the woods and familiarity with different animals and different circumstances in the day and the night, I might think if someone who's been hunting for 25 years tells me about an experience, and usually they're like, I never believed in Bigfoot. I thought it was, nonsense. But then I was in the woods and, well, this person, I'm thinking, okay, they're probably not mistaking something else because they are very familiar. Whereas if I get a report, the first time I went camping, I've never been out of the city, and I went camping and we saw a Bigfoot. They may have very well saw a Bigfoot, yes. but I probably wouldn't stake my life on that one. I would put it on what I would consider somebody familiar with the woods and everything else. So, every encounter, depending on the person, is going to stack up different as far as the credibility meter. But I do think that people are legit. They see stuff, and they're not making it up. I mean, certainly you do have those cases, but in most circumstances, they just, man, I saw this. I think it was a Bigfoot.
Wow.
See, that would be me. I'm a glamper. I will shut the camper door and open a bottle of Chardonnay. That'd be it.
So, I can encounter ghosts, but I really don't necessarily want to come face to face with a Bigfoot. I really don't. I'm only 5'1", so something like that would be seriously intimidating to me. No, go and close the door.
So you say,
and I think that's what another thing is. A lot of people come up, nonchalant. Oh yeah, I saw a Bigfoot. It looked in my truck window. In reality, I mean, you just like you're thinking. Could you imagine seeing something, a 7-foot tall, hairy, rough-looking, powerful-looking thing you've never seen? Like, just think about a gorilla you've seen in the zoo, but this thing is standing upright. It would be far more scary and traumatizing, I think. Yep. There wouldn't be any sort of like, oh, well, yeah, I saw that. It would shake you up. And that's another thing. When I interview a witness and they are shaken up, even when they're retelling the story, and that's happened many times where they are literally upset. That's the reaction I feel like is legitimate, because if you saw something like that, it would be flipping your world upside down,
Yeah.
So you say these two women was going north on the coastal highway in Florida?
Yes, they were. I want to say they were near a town called Cedar Key. I may be wrong about that. It's been a minute since I looked at that one, but they had been on a cruise, and they were coming. They docked that morning, and they got in their car, and they were driving. I don't remember where they lived at the time. One of the girls has moved all over, but they were driving, and they were going through is a very heavily wooded area, and in that region there has been a history of Bigfoot reports. They were just driving, and all of a sudden they kind of rounded that corner, and this thing just boom right across the road.
Wow.
And then ran into the woods. Well, like I was just saying, they immediately just freaked out, and they had the wherewithal to turn around. They did a U-turn, and they turned on their phone and were ready in case they saw it again. But you can hear them talking about it, and as they're filming, the wood line as they're going back and looking, and you can tell that this is no act. These two ladies were freaked out, and unfortunately they didn't see the creature again. And I even actually went frame by frame to look and see if I could see it in those woods, maybe looking out, but I didn't see it. But you don't often have two witnesses. Usually it's one person saying they saw a Bigfoot. This is two people, broad daylight, and we're fairly confident that it was an animal, not a person, that ran across the road. So that, and again, I've gotten that one of the girls got very much into Bigfoot because of that, because she was almost wanting to figure out, what is it I saw? I want to know more. So she started coming to different conferences, and I've seen her many times over the last 5 or 6 years since then. And I still believe these are stand-up witnesses. Her and her sister are just some of the best I have ever encountered. And if only these two girls saw a Bigfoot, then that's enough to say they exist.
Wow. All right. It's time for us to take a break. And let's see, who usually takes us out?
Well, after about 2 years, I think me.
Okay, then, Jeff, why don't you take us out for break? And We'll be back in about 7-8 minutes. So, Jeff?
Yep. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cab Barbara Duncan, Tabby Cat Gash, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with our guest cryptozoologist Lyle Blackburn. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para-X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal. Para-X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one. Remember, if you got questions of our guests, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat, Tabby Cat, or myself, Henry Foister, and we will get those answered for you. So with that, we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And we have Tabby Cat Gash.
Hi, everybody.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello.
All right, and who's introducing our guest then?
We have
just one of you. That's all. Just
Jeff does that stuff. Jeez. Jeff always does that stuff.
Do it, Jeff.
Yeah. So it's Lyle Blackburn, a great cryptozoologist and one of our better guests.
Yes. Want to welcome you back, Lyle.
Thank you. You probably say that to all the guests, I'm sure.
No. Not all of them. You'd be surprised some of the ones we've had over the years.
And sorry to say this, Henry, but he has the best-looking cowboy hat.
Oh, yeah.
That we've ever had.
He does, definitely.
How often have you ever had a chance to meet the Booth brothers? The three of you together would be a heck of a photo shoot.
No, I haven't, but yes, that would make a great photo.
Wow.
No, wait, I saw one of them. I did see one at, what was that? Scarefest or something, but
right.
it was very briefly, but yeah. They dress really cool. They got the whole deal too.
Scarefest is in Lexington. I've been there, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. So
yeah, that's the one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then Mid-South is over in Louisville. So,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, of all these different sightings and creatures, because I know you talk about the lizard man and the senator, the boogie, the beast of Boggy Creek. So, what is the difference between these different characters?
Well, there's, I guess, several main categories of cryptids. Bigfoot being kind of the foremost and the one that I consider to be the most probable to be proven. Within that, you have a lot of just regional names for those creatures, like Boggy Creek Monster, in the Ohio Grassman, the Missouri Monster, Momo, things like that. But essentially, they're all just described as, ape-like, man-like, bipedal creatures. Then you have things like the lizard man, which is more of a reptilian humanoid sort of thing, not to be confused with alligator people, which sort of, there's some legends in Florida of something that's a little bit more alligator-like than humanoid, I guess. There's dogmen, which are basically quote-unquote werewolf-like creatures, large canids that can walk upright on 2 legs. I've gotten a lot of reports. It seems like a rash of reports of dogmen lately that can come from really anywhere. There was a concentration in Wisconsin back in the mid-'80s that kind of ramped up to become the focal point, but I've had plenty of people say they've seen dogmen things in Texas and Louisiana and other places. Then you have the river monsters, which are aquatic sort of beasts, from serpent-like to snake-like, sometimes described as being Loch Ness monster, so to speak, but usually there's the white river monster, the Altamaha river monster that I talked about earlier. There's ones like that. Of course, the chupacabra, I get asked about a lot because I'm in Texas, and there's these mangy, four-legged, canid, dog-looking creatures, coyote things that are called chupacabras, even though it's a confusing term because chupacabra was originally applied to a cryptid seen in the Puerto Rico and Latin American countries back in the mid-90s. And then the U.S. media took that name and gave it to these four-legged creatures you see. I'm sure people have seen the dash cam video on some of these shows where it shows that weird-looking dog running in front of the cop. And these are things that are out there and kind of still remain to be certain what they are. Those are your main cryptids, I suppose. And then within that, you have things like black panthers, which people report quite a bit, seeing these huge black felines. And when they say panther, that's the same, basically a local colloquial term for cougar or mountain lion, of which there is never been a proven case where they are melanistic. They're not supposed to be black. You do have black jaguars and black leopards, melanistic jaguars. So when people say they saw a black panther, that is an unproven animal. So that falls into cryptozoology as well. And then sightings of both thunderbirds or feathered, giant, huge flying birds, as well as pterosaurs, which people describe as being leathery skinned, basically like a pterodactyl. It's something from the age of the dinosaurs. And, I've investigated those kind of sightings. I mean, some people in Oklahoma, 2 pairs of witnesses say they saw what looked like a pterodactyl fly over this area near Oklahoma City. And there again, those people were not making this up. And both sets of witnesses did not know each other, and they reported this thing within the same time period. One of them having seen it very up close in the windshield of their truck. And so, you just get reports of these wild and crazy cryptids of all sorts of categories.
Lyle, we've got a question from the chat room. Black Cat Sharon she just recently tuned in. She wanted to know from you about the various different colors of fur and the size differences in the Bigfoot. I know that they have reported anything from black to red and all kinds of other colors. Do you think there's a variation, especially based on where they come from?
I think there is. I mean, judging from the sighting reports, and the most prevalent reports are of a dark brown to black color hair on the creatures, but you do get some people saying that it was blondish or auburn, red in color, and even white. There's a famous case from where I live called the Lake Worth Monster, where people reported this hairy white sort of Bigfoot. I was in Fouke, Arkansas about a month or 2 ago, and someone there that I met reported seeing this ape-like creature that ran across the road in front of his car, and he said it looked to be the color of an orangutan. So it's red, and he actually shortly thereafter, I was out in the woods in that area, and I saw something that was reddish. I saw a shadow that caught my eye, which I looked over thinking, what did I just see? And then I saw this red-looking thing, probably about 120 yards, move very fluidly across diagonally between these trees. I don't know what that was, but it was very odd that somebody had told me they saw what they said looked like an orangutan. So the point here being that I think, like people, their hair color can vary. And of course, perhaps as they get older, they either, they get darker or turn gray, or, the hair could change colors as they go. So the inconsistencies in the hair color don't necessarily imply that this is not a real phenomenon. It just simply says that they could be very much like us.
Yeah.
So why do you think that there is, from what I understand, no one has ever reported finding a body of one of these creatures, or where they might have been buried in a grave or something?
Well, that obviously is a problem, but there again doesn't necessarily say that they don't exist. But the best thing we can say is that with the very few numbers of the population of these creatures, it is extremely hard to find a dead one, because, we go back to the old adage of how many times have you run across a dead bear, which is quite true. Most, even my father's hunted for years, and people I know have hunted East Texas, where bears occasionally, black bears, do go. And, if I just say, have you ever seen a bear? You ever seen a dead bear? You ever seen a track? Most of them are like, I think I saw a track once, never seen a dead one. Again, the bear population quite far exceeds those of what Bigfoot would require to be a viable population. So I think maybe it's luck, or, it's not to say that somebody hasn't come across the bones. I had a guy who had a really weird case of a guy who said back in the 1970s, he was down in the Trinity River bottom south of Dallas, and it was pretty wooded back then. He said his dog came up from the river, and in his mouth he had a leg, which was from the knee portion down all the way, had the foot. It was these bones covered with some hair of this huge, he said this wasn't a human. This looked kind of like a human bone, but it was huge. He said, I never thought about it until many years later, till I saw Bigfoot shows, that I thought, well, maybe it was a Bigfoot bone. So, of course, he had called the cops or something, and they came out and just, I don't know, and he never knew what happened to it. It got out of his hands. But again, he may have found legitimate bones of a Bigfoot, but, now they're lost. And it's not to say that some hunters haven't passed by and thought, there's a femur of a cow, and just walked on by. So there could have been bones found, or pieces of a dead Bigfoot, but if you didn't know what you were looking for, or weren't specifically thinking, I just jackpot, I found, if you didn't find the head or something, then that would explain why we don't have bones, I guess.
I'm often curious as to, watching all these television shows, you see the people making plaster casts of footprints. And of course, they refer to them as a Bigfoot footprint because of how huge they are. It always tickles me to no end that when people on these shows find what they claim would have to have been a Bigfoot print because of its size, there always only seems to be one of them. What, a Bigfoot only hop around on one foot? I just find that so interesting that rather than finding, like 3 or 4 of them along a riverbed or on a slightly muddy side road or something, that they only managed to find one good one. That tickles me. It really does.
You're right. In most cases, that is. However, there are a lot of cases where a trackway was found, and there could be, there may be only 3, but there could be 20. And I've had people who had a cast and say, I cast this, and then I'll say, well, were there more? Well, yeah, this is the best one, so I cast this one, Now, of course, I would have taken thorough pictures and whatever, and cast all of them, but a lot of people don't have the wherewithal. So you're right. Most of the time, it's this odd one track, and but it's harder to find tracks than you think. I mean, in the woods, most of the leaf litter and things like that don't leave good tracks. And then if they stepped in the one spot where there was a dirt or mud, then maybe there was the track, and then they got back up on the leaves, nothing to be seen. So they'd really have to walk along, the edge of a river or something where there was a good strip of mud to leave a lot of them. So.
Now, Lyle, I wanted to get your take on what I see as seems to be a new approach to finding Bigfoot, which is the taking DNA samples from the water and trying to discover what animals are drinking from it, urinating in it, etc. And do you think that that's probably going to be a good breakthrough for finding some of these cryptids?
Yeah, I think that might become something that would be useful. I mean, obviously, as we progress with better and better DNA technology and able to, discern what has passed across certain parts of the land, that this is ideal for cryptid hunting because you rarely see the creatures, but certainly they have to have, if they exist, they would have to drink out of that water or whatever they're doing. Or if we have an area where people say they have seen a lot of them, or if you find a footprint, you could actually take some of that soil and possibly get some DNA out of it. So I think, as those things become better, it's helpful. Of course, usually it's a problem of money. I mean, it's the people who are taking those surveys are not out there using that to look for Bigfoot. They're doing other kinds of, more immediate research or whatever they're doing. Whereas if you came up with a sample of water to somebody and said, hey, can you test this for Bigfoot? They're either not going to do it or they're going to say, sure, that's $20,000, no problem. So that's the stumbling block usually, is the technology is expensive, at least at first.
Well, to test something like that, wouldn't you have to have a real sample to go by so you could clarify it?
Yes, if you don't have a type specimen, the best you're ever going to do is say, well, there's some DNA in here that we can't identify. And, perhaps we're one chromosome off from a chimpanzee, so it would be very close to great apes, but not. And there's cases of hair samples that are like that, where the best you can do is say, well, it doesn't match any of the local flora and the local fauna, but you don't have a Bigfoot hair or Bigfoot DNA on file. Well, you can't. That's not going to prove it. Only give you a clue that maybe something strange is there.
Yeah. Well, any scientific research has to have a control first.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have something at least to compare with, how are you going to know if it's a Bigfoot or if it isn't just a degraded sample or a contaminated sample or something like that? So I guess until DNA testing gets a lot more far advanced, it's still kind of a hit and miss as to whether or not they're going to find anything.
Right. I think ultimately, without a body at this point, it's just nobody's going to accept any thing short of that is proof. I mean, you know, I don't care if it's a very clear picture. Somebody will, you know, will say that's hoax. You know, I mean, the CGI capabilities we have and Photoshop and everything else is so advanced that, you know, even the DNA thing, without that sample. So I think if Bigfoot or any of these other cryptids are to be proved, we're going to need bodies. That doesn't mean I'm advocating to go kill one. I'm just saying that's the reality of proving these at this point, probably.
Sure. Before it gets too late, I really want to ask you about this, and that is, you were an executive producer on a documentary called The Mothman of Point Pleasant. And I'm curious as to what conclusions you're coming to as to whether or not Mothman is a cryptid or is it something more supernatural?
Well, yeah, the Mothman case is fairly unique because it does kind of encompass so many of the different paranormal categories, from cryptid to UFO phenomenon to the whole Men in Black thing that was going on in Point Pleasant back when those original sightings were taking place in 1966 and 1967. The cryptid sort of angle of that is that, yeah, I know those people, those witnesses saw something, at least many of them saw something that, you know, was there, and they saw it, and it could not identify it, and it can't be explained away as, oh, it was a crane or an owl or what have you. But then as you progress with all the other witness reports that tell of Mothman sightings that were more bizarre in nature, that you begin to wonder whether that was was indeed a cryptid or a physical animal, or if it was some other type of phenomenon. So, you know, I'm open-minded to whatever, really. So I don't have a great answer as to what the Mothman is, other than to say there was a very, very strange phenomenon going on in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, starting in 1966, perhaps not sooner, of this winged entity that quite a number of people saw in conjunction with other strange phenomenon. So I don't have any sort of one theory for it. It could more so be a combination where people did see some sort of a strange bird or an out-of-place creature that was of huge proportions, and then other people saw other things, and they were all then linked together because they had been seen in one spot. So it could be a combination of things, really, that built up the whole Mothman legend. So
John Keel's correlation with it being a harbinger of some sort of accidents or crises that are going to happen. I don't know how much you studied them, but is it possible that there is a correlation?
Well, I mean, possible, because, you know, there in December of 1967, the Silver Bridge, which spans from the little town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, over to Ohio, collapsed, and 46 people died in that river. And that pretty much put an end to the Mothman thing. You know, people didn't want to hear about the Mothman anymore after this tragedy. Well, of course, you know, obviously then you could look at the Mothman as if it was some harbinger of doom, that it was being seen or was there as either a warning or whatever, an omen, that there was going to be this terrible tragedy. And, you know, of course, there's rumors that someone saw the Mothman on the bridge just before it collapsed, but that's kind of hearsay. But there's always been harbingers of doom, you know, range for all sorts of entities, but certainly the sort of winged humanoid seems to fit very well with our, with folklore and with legacies of these kind of harbingers. So I don't know, that's another thing that just really makes it an amazing case because, and especially great that John Keel was there to document that and put forward all these theories. So again, I think if it wasn't a harbinger of doom, it sure was there at the right time,
I was unaware of the MIB correlation with that.
Oh yeah, there was. There was a woman named Mary Heyer that wrote a column in a local newspaper, and she began to write a lot about the Mothman sightings. And according to her, some men came into her office one day, and they were these generic-looking government officials or whatever they were, and told her to stop. Don't look into this anymore. Don't write about it. And it shook her up pretty bad. And other people in the town had said they had seen these, nameless sort of guys dressed in suits wandering around right around the time when the Mothman was at the high point of the sightings and the whole deal. So yeah, that was a whole thing going on there too.
Doesn't that sometimes create sort of a Streisand effect? If the Men in Black show up and say, "Don't look into this," you're like, "Well, clearly it's something to look into then."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they tell me that. I'm like, I know I'm onto something good. It's like your parents telling you, "Don't go over there. Don't go into them woods." Where are you going? Going in the woods.
I've always looked at the Mothman, believe it or not, as almost a gargoyle. Every time I see different pictures of it down through the ages and everything, it just reminds me of your typical mythical creature called the gargoyle. And the gargoyles have always been guardians of some sort, and they were mythical creatures, and they had to have had their basis in some sort of fact to be created. What was it? More than 1,000 years ago, they started out. I wonder if maybe the Mothman wasn't some sort of a throwback to some sort of a gargoyle.
Yeah, I mean, you can always kind of look at, as they say, everything has a grain of truth, and the gargoyles, conceivably came not from complete imagination, but perhaps from something that one of those first artisans or architects had seen that inspired that, what we know as gargoyles. So, it could be a similar or same phenomenon that was being seen there, not necessarily the same interpretation of a gargoyle that's on a French building, but perhaps something that, very much strikes a resemblance to that. So, not to mention that other people have seen things occasionally that they report as being gargoyles. I see published reports about people comparing what they saw to a gargoyle. So it's not completely unheard of for somebody to literally compare something they saw to a gargoyle.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's exactly what it reminds me of. Every time I see the statue that they have in the town, my first reaction is that just looks like a gargoyle. And so if I were to see that thing flying around, that's exactly what I would be thinking of.
Yeah, and certainly the statue. I mean, the statue is quite stylized and everything, but yeah, it's very. I mean, it's just completely fascinating how that statue is there, and I've never thought about it in those terms of how literally it's like a modern gargoyle statue in a small town in West Virginia. But yes, that's people saw some weird flying thing, and then now there's a statue of what looks like a gargoyle. That's really cool.
And it's a guardian. I think it wasn't necessarily a harbinger. I think it just kind of sensed that there was something off and happened to arrive, very conspicuously on time. I don't think it necessarily maybe knew what was going on, but I think it had a tendency to sense it. I mean, people and animals, we can sense when something might be getting ready to happen. I mean, a lot of animals know exactly when storms are going to happen or earthquakes, that sort of thing. And then there are, people that can predict things that are going on just by their intuition and messages that they get. So why not something like the Mothman? And who knows that maybe that Bigfoot doesn't have almost the same feelings or the same way of being in the sense when somebody is in their area, not necessarily by sight or smell, but general overall animal intuition that there's something going on, and they either check it out or they avoid it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it.
Now, earlier we were talking about the various different forms of communication and brought up that some people feel weird in an area where they think that Bigfoot might be, whether it's a feeling of dread or they're getting headaches or something like that. There have been a lot of case studies on animals who use different sound waves in order to communicate. And one of the ones that I noticed that they claim now that T-Rex had, that our modern day Australians have, is that ability to give off that low drone vibration. And we see it in the crocodiles, especially when they're in the water, because it bubbles up when they do it. Now, we can barely it, they can, but we can feel it. So I wonder if maybe the reason that people feel weird in the woods and get this almost nauseous feeling is because Bigfoot might be giving off vocal waves or vibrations that we don't necessarily, but we can feel. And that might be a way of their communication.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And that's why I think a lot of times we underestimate the capabilities of amazing animals. We're quick to say, oh, well, it must be supernatural. But, I know that, even some animals can hear really low frequencies, like dolphins and bats and things have different sensory perceptions that we don't. And it's, extremely possible that something like Bigfoot could communicate with low frequencies and something that could affect us. We could feel it or sense it, but it could be something that they're using also to communicate with each other. And that we can't quite hear, but that we can certainly feel, and it could give us a strange, unsettling, reaction. So, yeah, I think that a lot of this stuff still falls into the realm of those amazing animals, if you will, and things that, we just don't yet understand. And, just so many possibilities.
I got a question from the chat room from Black Cat Sharon, and she wants to know, what do these things eat? Does anyone know?
Well, like everything, the best we can do is speculate.
Yeah.
But, I would kind of say that, they're big. Bigfoots need a lot of calories, sustenance. So they're going to probably be opportunistic feeders, omnivorous. There's, depending on where they live, there's a variety of roots and plants and berries that they would enjoy. And, There's been reports. I've had a hunter say he was sitting in a tree stand and watched a Bigfoot come in there and kill a wild hog. So, of course, there's plenty of hogs here in the South. Deer. I mean, many people believe that Bigfoot will kill a deer, and there's been some bizarre carcasses of deer found. So I think certainly deer would be a good food source. You know, whatever else they're willing to eat, frogs and I suppose insects and, just about anything. So I think there's no lack of food out there if you're willing to to hunt for it and to eat it.
Now, do you think any of these different sightings could be associated with aliens?
Well, I don't see a great correlation between aliens and Bigfoot. That being said, there are a few cases where people report seeing unidentified balls of light or UFO craft, and then within the same night or proximity, somebody sees a Bigfoot. And I wrote a book called Momo, The Strange Case of the Missouri Monster, which was one such case that had all sorts of bizarre phenomenon going on, as well as this really kind of frightening Bigfoot creature that very credible witnesses had seen. But by and large, however, there's just not a big correlation, because most Bigfoot sightings are simply somebody saw a big ape in the woods. No bizarre lights or phenomenon. And you can look at literally thousands upon thousands of Bigfoot reports, and you're not going to see anything having to do with aliens, nor do I think there are pets of aliens being dropped off on Earth. That's really stretching it, I think. And again, just comes back to they look so much like the image of similar Earth dwellers, such as great apes, including us. They could very well, have branched off of a tree that's much closer to hominids. So they just seem to fit right into, the earthly family of creatures. So I don't think they're aliens. That's just my opinion.
Well, Lyle, just hoping the audio keeps up. Is it possible Sasquatch and its ilk may have been descended from Gigantopithecus?
That's a possibility. Gigantopithecus was a huge ape that lived in Asia perhaps 13,000 years ago. All we have right now for that particular species of animal is a jawbone and a bunch of teeth. So, there's not a lot of stuff to work with. And because of the way the jawbone is shaped, theories have come out that the Gigantopithecus walked upright. And if it did, it could have been up to like 13 feet tall. And if the creature had come across the Bering Land Bridge to North America when that was, not underwater, then that might explain, the presence of apes in North America. So it's a good theory, but again, it's a lot of speculation because we just don't have much in the way of fossils, which also coincidentally answers the question of how come we don't have any Bigfoot fossils. Well, we know Gigantopithecus lived, and we have one jawbone and a bunch of teeth, and that's just because we were lucky and they were found in a cave which preserved them. So it's just because something is here doesn't mean they're littering the earth with fossils that are easily found.
So I don't know if you've seen it or not, the photograph from the Danteloff Pass group.
Oh, yeah.
Showed a photograph of what they believed might have been a Bigfoot. I don't know if you've seen that or not, or whether or not you want to comment, or whether or not a Bigfoot could have done all the damage.
That was a television show that co-opted a photo that had nothing to do with those people. They didn't take that photo.
Really? Okay.
I believe from Ivan Marks. That was just TV hullabaloo that puts this together. It's unfortunate because some of those television shows are seen by so many people that it becomes now, something that's widely thought of. Of course, that doesn't mean that there can't be a theory that maybe a Yeti or the Almas Russian Bigfoots didn't get them, but simply that TV show made all that stuff up about the photo. That's incorrect or fake. But I don't think that was caused by Bigfoot. From what I've read and seen, that it's very much, you're talking about governments and military installations and things over there that people come to an untimely end if they get around those things or too close. Not to mention they're in just an inhospitable environment to start with. That I don't necessarily think that Bigfoot is the answer for what happened to them.
It's certainly the brutality of the attack. I certainly don't see that in anybody who says they come across a Bigfoot in the United States, at least.
Yeah, it is. It would be a wild exception to the majority of the sightings that, I think if those creatures were that aggressive, or where there's one, there could be others, that we would have seen some massacres, that have come before and since, and we just don't see that, we just don't.
Are you familiar with, are there any First Nation folklore of Bigfoot?
Yes, there is many stories that most of the tribes tell about some sort of what they would call hairy man or forest people or lost giants. There's words that we've translated from Native American languages and extrapolated from their stories that we think, they could very well be talking about a Bigfoot. And of course, when you get into Native American stories, it's often hard to tell what they consider a spirit animal or something that's ethereal and what is a actual terrestrial, creature. But there's enough there to suggest that certainly there's something to it, and there's some cave drawings of what's called hairy man, and those do very much resemble a Bigfoot, and those, were long before anybody had ever coined the term, or even Westerners had even been over here. So, and then if you talk to, I live very close to Oklahoma, where there's a lot of tribal folks up there, and they will tell you that, oh yeah, we know they're here, we're aware of them, we respect them. They have a different view of Bigfoot than Westerners do. And so, yeah, there's a support from Native Americans that suggests these creatures have been here all along.
Wow.
And then, of course, in Oklahoma right now, isn't there some county that has a Bigfoot hunt going on?
Yeah, the Oklahoma in the last several years has really realized that Bigfoot is great for tourism, and that is part of that. At first they kind of didn't word it right, even though they said we're not advocating a dead Bigfoot, we want proof of one, a live subject. They had to come back and kind of correct that. Look, we say hunt, but we mean hunt for evidence. We don't mean like hunt one, please. And, part of that is good fun. Oklahoma is a place that most people don't, connect to Bigfoot, but there is some really, really good sightings that have occurred in the eastern portion of Oklahoma. And I mentioned earlier about the guys I knew that had been researching up there for years in the Ouachita Mountains. And, I've written in my book, Beyond Boggy Creek, I write a lot about some of the Oklahoma history. It's a great place, but, they've really had a lot of fun now with the Bigfoot. And so, that's just kind of comes with the territory. But I always say, hey, it's better more Bigfoot than less Bigfoot. So it's all.
Yep, exactly. We've already killed off enough animals just in the last 50 years. So many of them are on the brink of extinction and everything because of big game hunting and just plain sport or just encroachment on their territory. And, it's a shame that maybe one of these days they will find the body of a Bigfoot, but by that time it'll be extinct because, we've just taken over everything that they have. That's a shame.
And I have a very light question. What is the plural of Bigfoot? I mean, Bigfoot and Sasquatch, I cannot figure out what the plural of those are.
Big feet.
That is a debate not unlike whether a Bigfoot exists. It's, the chicken or the egg. Is it the big feets, the big Sasquatch, the Sasquatch? Is it? No one knows. I see people going both ways. I don't know. I think I try to, in my books, I just try to avoid using the plural just for that reason. But I think it's Bigfoots would be more accurate, or Sasquatches rather than the big.
I'll go with that.
But technically, I mean, if it has one big foot, then the other foot is big, so it does have big feet.
Yeah. Our time is running right on down. I got time for probably one more quick question from somebody. Is there anybody in the chat room that had one, or one that you guys got?
It's Bigfoot.
Lyle, is there any one particular place here anywhere in the world that you haven't been so far to search for Bigfoot that you would really like to go to?
Well, I haven't really been up much in the Pacific Northwest area. And I've been up there some few times over the years, but I've really never been able to thoroughly, take some time and go into the heart of, the original Bigfoot country. So that's something that would be great to do, and hopefully I'll get some time to do it. I guess there's always so much going on that, and then people have covered that area quite extensively. But yeah, I would like to go into the Pacific Northwest for an extended amount of time if I can.
I wish you luck on it.
Mount Shasta, there's a lot of caverns in there.
Yeah, it's beautiful up there. Anytime I've been up to that Washington State areas, it's just a great, I don't know, it's just very scenic and peaceful in many ways. So it would just be, whether I saw a Bigfoot or not, it would still be a really great trip.
Wow. All right, our time is dwindling right on down. I want you to take and give out your sites and how people can follow you and all the good stuff, and then stay on till after we're off, and then we'll thank you.
All right. So if you want to find out more about my books and the films I've been involved in, just visit lyleblackburn.com, and that has links to all the appropriate destinations. My books are available at my online store, and they're also available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some of them in hardback, and one of them now in audiobook. So if you would like to see the other Small Town Monsters movies, you can search the Amazon Prime Video, just search for Lyle Blackburn, and all those will come up. So thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
No problem.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Now, Tabby, why don't you let everybody know who or Jeff? Which one of you guys has that info for next week?
Tabby.
Okay. Tabby.
Yes. Next week we will be chatting with author, paranormal researcher, and paranormal investigator Rich Newman about all of his really interesting experiences in the ghostly realm. So tune in.
All right. I guess it's pretty much. Barbara, do you have anything to add for anything?
But please check Lyle's site. It's absolutely wonderful. Also check out his videos because he also writes and produces documentaries. So please check them out.
Definitely.
All right.
And thank you.
Yes.
Yes. So with that, I think it's time for us to run. And as soon as I get my thing brought up here, we can start doing that. But, okay. So, until then, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
Barbara Duncan.
Cat Cash.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So, good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.